Imagine you, yes, you, the viewer. Imagine your job is defending the innocents, and after years you discover the innocents are the ones getting locked up while the criminals walk free. What would you do then? Would you just keep living your normal life and surrender to reality because the system is above everything and can't be changed? Or would you establish your own justice? A lawyer who saw so much injustice it made him lose faith in justice itself. Imagine losing faith in the thing that separates right from wrong. Imagine losing faith in your moral compass. The result will be mental breakdown and no longer distinguishing between right and wrong. Higuruma sees that no one is innocent and everyone is guilty. Society itself is criminal and punishment has to be inevitable. And here, the contradiction between him and Yuji stands out. Higuruma sees guilt in everyone, and everyone is wrong, unlike Yuji who carries all the guilt on himself. Yuji punishes himself, Higuruma punishes the world. A character who is one of the most important, if not the most important, in the Culling Game arc. After he appeared in the last episode, I had to grab my coffee cup and make this video.
But before we start, as everyone can see, this channel is completely new and literally the only thing that can motivate me is your support and interaction with the videos. So don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and without dragging it out, let's start. And yeah, the video contains a small manga spoiler.
Higuruma wasn't a normal person at all. He was a heady-hitter defense lawyer to the point his colleagues called him the genius. He got into a prestigious university and was top of his class, and after graduating, he joined the bar association in Iwate. But there was something weird about him from the start. Higuruma didn't like easy cases. He went looking for the impossible cases. Cases where the defendant is screwed before the trial even starts. Evidence against him, prosecution pushing hard, and the judge's look shows the verdict is already ready. Any normal lawyer would have run from that type. But him, he enjoyed flipping the table, looking for any hole in the prosecution's argument, any tiny mistake to grab. And he always said his famous line, "Easy work dulls the skills." Higuruma truly believed every person deserves a fair trial, and he saw himself as a shield for weak people against a system that could crush them without thinking. But over time, he started noticing something terrifying. The system doesn't always look for truth. Sometimes it's just looking for someone to convict, and judges were biased from the start many times. And if the defendant looks weak or branded as criminal, game over.
And in one specific case, he managed to get an acquittal after a retrial. And here's the shock. The system intended to convict that guy from day one, without caring about circumstances or evidence, just because he was stamped criminal. That moment broke something inside him. Not just his trust in the system, but his trust in himself too. He started feeling like the justice he's fighting for is just a mask, a front for an unjust system from the inside. And from there, the change began. The change that made a lot of people see Higuruma as unhinged. But is he actually crazy, or is he the only one who saw the truth? Okay, important question. How does a normal civilian suddenly become a Jujutsu sorcerer and use cursed energy? With Kenjaku's plan and the start of the Culling Game, cursed energy started awakening in many civilians, and Higuruma was one of them. But because he's terrifyingly smart, he understood the game unnaturally fast. In about 12 days only, he reached a level comparable to a grade 1 sorcerer and learned domain expansion on the first try, something normal sorcerers spend their whole lives without reaching. And of course, his terrifying curse technique. I'll dedicate a full video to it soon, so subscribe so you don't miss it. Higuruma has a bit weird belief. All humans are weak and ugly, no matter how much they claim to have noble souls. Higuruma doesn't just see humans as evil by nature, but weak first. Their weakness is what makes them accept injustice, or practice it, or stay silent about it. This bleak view is the result of long accumulated courtroom experiences, more than abstract philosophy. At first, when Higuruma was still a bright young guy, he idolized legal justice. He saw it as above everything and impossible to be wrong even once. But with time and experience, and repeating the same injustice, Hiromi transformed from faith in the system's justice to believing the law is a tool in the hands of the strong, and it can be manipulated.
Higuruma is extremely sensitive to the issue of who bears the guilt. His experience with the system made him see how the weak get loaded with all the sins, while the strong get out with minimal damage. So when Yuji confessed to him about taking responsibility for the Shibuya massacre, even though he knew Sukuna was the real culprit, Higuruma shook internally. I'll talk more about Yuji and Higuruma in detail later, but we need to analyze Higuruma's character first and understand how he reached this extreme thinking.
Genius people like Higuruma aren't just good at their jobs, they also have extremely high analytical minds. They spot gaps fast, connect events, and understand the problem is way deeper than just an individual case. This type of intelligence usually leads to three things. First, you see injustice clearer than others. Second, you feel powerless because you understand the problem is the system itself, not one person. Third, you feel isolated because most people deal with things superficially and you're seeing the depth of the rot. And that explains why Higuruma transformed from an idealistic, excited person to a cynical and mentally exhausted one. Every new case stopped being a chance to achieve justice and became a reminder that the whole system is fucked. His actions in the theater when Yuji saw him, like sleeping in the pantry in his clothes or making weird jokes, are all signs of losing meaning in daily life, a mix of depression and apathy covered with clowning. And that's exactly like the burnout that happens to us. When you lose faith in the value of what you're doing, you turn into a sarcastic version of yourself and act weird or randomly because you simply no longer see a real difference between right and wrong in your personal life.
Higuruma lives a clear conflict between idealism and realism. The same guy who says humans are weak and ugly is the one who couldn't sentence Yuji to death because he refuses to wrong an innocent. And that reveals an internal conflict between two versions, the old ideal Hiromi who can't stand seeing injustice and wants to save the innocent, and the realistic, desperate Hiromi who learned from experience that the system doesn't change and individual efforts are mostly pointless. Yuji works here as a trigger. He wakes the ideal part inside him, a young guy who confesses to crimes he didn't do just because he sees himself as weak. That scene awakens empathy in Higuruma for human weakness that seemed like he despises it, but actually he respects it because he sees in it the root of morality. And that makes him rethink humans. Maybe not everyone is ugly like he thought. At least there are people willing to carry the pain of guilt instead of others. And here we reach the most important point, the real difference between Yuji and Hiromi.
If we look honestly, we'll find Yuji and Higuruma aren't different in everything. On the contrary, they have a lot of shared traits. First thing, high sense of responsibility toward others. Yuji carries the guilt for all the people who died because of Sukuna, even though basically he was just a vessel and the situation was forced on him. Still, he confesses to Higuruma that he sees himself as the cause because he was weak. Higuruma too, despite his nihilistic cold appearance, entered law in the first place because he can't ignore the feeling of wrong. Any clear injustice in front of him, he has to try to fix, even if it destroys him mentally. Second thing, willingness to bear personal pain for a principle. Yuji is ready to die or suffer if it lightens guilt from others or saves innocence. Same thing, Higuruma put his reputation, job, and whole mental life on the line just to defend losing cases because he simply couldn't see someone wronged and stay silent. Third thing, connection to the weak. Yuji always stands with normal people and sometimes even weak curses if killing them has no meaning. Higuruma dedicated his work to defendants no one defends, and later in the culling game focused on weak players the system crushes. Even if he tried for a while to convince himself to stay cold, he couldn't keep it up. But despite all that similarity, there are real core differences that shape each one's personality. First difference, way of understanding justice. Yuji's justice is human and simple. Whoever harms innocents must be stopped, and whoever can be saved must be saved, even if it breaks rules or orders. In opposites, Higuruma was raised on legal justice, rules, evidence, courts, verdicts, and even when he doubted the whole system, he couldn't let go of the language of trial and judgment. And that's super clear that his domain is literally a courtroom, not a battlefield. Second difference, their view of weakness. Yuji admits his weakness and sees it as motivation to evolve, not a reason to surrender. When he said the massacre happened because he was weak, that was mature admission, not self-flagellation. Higuruma at one point saw weakness as disgusting
disgusting, like a shame in humans. But his confrontation with Yuji makes him start understanding that admitting weakness can be moral courage, not a flaw. Last point, the development that happened between them during the confrontation. Yuji entered the fight carrying heavy guilt and still didn't lie or try to escape at any cost, confirming his moral stability. Higuruma entered as an aggressive fighter, drawn to the brutality of the culling game rules, and refused to help Yuji at first. But he came out of that confrontation having regained a big part of his humanity, to the point he sacrifices winning with his own hands and uses his points to save others.
Hiromi Higuruma is one of Jujutsu Kaisen's most complex characters on psychological and intellectual build. Gege nailed his writing honestly. His background as a genius, idealistic lawyer, then frustrated, then gradually returns to himself through facing Yuji was perfect. Higuruma returned to his moral compass not because the system improved, not because the world became fairer, but because one person decided to bear the pain of truth. And that might be the biggest lesson in Higuruma's character. Justice isn't laws, isn't courts, isn't verdicts. Justice is you choosing right even when you're broken. And that's all I had about Higuruma's character. I tried not to spoil as much as possible for anime watchers. Don't forget to like and subscribe. This will help the channel grow fast, and I'll be super grateful to you, and peace.